and I'm a playwright, and I'm I just came from, I wanted to see Montana. So Greg Johnson arranged for Stacy Orr to drive me to Polson. I thought it said poison when we got there. Poison. I said, the town name. Well, we went to Isabel's, and I had for the first time buffalo burger, and I'm feeling very. And we had snowstorms and sunshine and rain, and I had everything. So I got a sense of my first time in Montana, and so I'm very, very happy. Very, very happy to be here. I'm from New York, born in New York, drug up there, and drug up in the streets of New York. So when I get back there, I just said this will be a. I didn't want to go back. My wife said, "Well, find out what it's like out there, so we can go back." So anyway, it's very, very nice. I'm afraid my title is going to be a little bit of a misnomer. They said, you have to have a title for your speech. And I said, okay, let's drag them in. I'll say, ripped from the headlines. I don't know what that means. I mean, we're always ripped from the headlines every day, isn't it? I mean, I haven't got a paper today, so I don't even know what happened. Did anything awful happen in the world overnight? Is Hillary still in the race?
10 million.
Huh?
She secretly got 10 million.
From you?
No.
You gave her $10 million?
No, I just made my donation this morning to someone else.
To someone else. Well, Poets for McCain, are you? Yes, is that? No, it's great. A person of color, yes. Well, we're all in New York very excited not to have our senator, to keep our senator in the Senate is what we say, yes. So anyway, I wanted to this is what I'm going to talk about. Somebody asked me yesterday, I talked to the students, and they said, where do you get your ideas? You know, where do they come? And what made me think, I went to see House of Blue Leaves, which is playing here, which I saw Greg Johnson did a really nice production of. I was very impressed by the students who are graduate and undergraduate students here. And it made me think very much of how I wrote the play. I went to Yale Drama School. I wanted to be a playwright. When I was 11 years old, I wanted to be a playwright for the only reason that I wanted to be in Life magazine. That was like the people, and I wanted I saw a story that said that Life goes to a summer vacation, and they filmed these two boys who did a story on these two boys who made a movie of Tom Sawyer. And I said, painting a fence and they get a story in Life magazine? I can do better than that. So my friend Bobby Schlamm, who lived across the street, I said, we don't have a movie camera, but I've seen plays. So I'll write one. I wrote 3 plays, and we said, we'll put them on in our garage, in Bobby's garage. We didn't have a garage. And so I did. We wrote the plays, we cast it with kids in the neighborhood, and puppets and everything. And I called up, we went up to Bruce's candy store, and we got the number of Life magazine. And so I dialed and said, Time Life? I said, yes, there are 2 boys who are putting on a play. Who do you wish to speak to? I said, no, there are these 2 boys that are putting on a story who make a wonderful, would make a good story. But who do you want to speak to? Time Life? I said, I don't know. Well, you have to talk to, anyway, they hung up on me. So I called up the local newspapers. I said, there are these 2 guys on Oswego Avenue who are doing a play, 3 plays, and they're going to give all the money to the orphans of Long Beach. They said, oh yeah, what's the address? They gave us the address, and we ran 5 days. And on the 5th day, a big black car pulled up, and these photographers got out, and they took our pictures of the show, and there I was, and there was a story in the paper, 11-year-old playwright. This was 1949. And I had it in front of me. I was a playwright, and I just literally felt my life go click, that I knew what I was going to do. I knew where I was for the rest of my life. I knew that was it. It said in the paper. My parents, for my 12th birthday, gave me a Royal portable typewriter. They said, to our playwright, and that was it. That was I was the playwright, and I had to, I was a lucky choice, a very, very lucky choice. I went to, and then also I was lucky in that my father worked at Wall Street and hated his life. And he said, whatever you do, Johnny, don't get a job. And I was it's the best advice. I was very, very lucky to have a father who said that. So when I said I wanted to be a writer, he just said, well, as long as it's legal, that My father hated being, he said, never be a wage slave. Make sure when you wake up in the morning you can't wait to get to do what it is you want to do. And let that be your life. Don't end up like me. What awful sad words. I mean, it was a man who died very unhappily. I mean, his life just did not, he thought he did all the right things and nothing worked out, you know, nothing worked out. So he just said, take it, just do what you have to do. And so I was still going to be a playwright. I went to Georgetown to college in Washington. And I didn't mean to, this is not the story about my life, so I'm ending up to a point about, this is not, Greg Johnson just came in who directed Blue Leads. I just gave you a good compliment, Greg, so I thank you. Anyway, so I had seen a ton of plays. I went to Yale Drama School, got my master's in playwriting, and I got out, and I realized I had spent, and the best thing, I got out, and what happened? I got drafted. I said, oh God, wait a minute, my life, when am I going to get into my, well, I got into the reserves at the last minute, 4 days before I was going to be drafted, and I was in for 6 months. And it was sort of great, because here I was, I had this Yale degree, and I was so pompous, and you know, I was a player, and I, out of 50 men, I was the only one who had graduated from high school, much less had a master's from Yale. And I was the only one from the Northeast. And what was wonderful about that, which was real shock, was the best way to end a formal education, because it showed me that everything I'd learned was of no value. It was of completely no value, that everything I had been smug about I didn't fare well in the real world, and it was wonderful. So I got out of the Air Force finally. I went to New York, and I was writing plays, and I realized I knew how to write a play. I could tell you everything about play structure and putting a play together and constructing a play. My problem was I had not one thing to write about. Life had passed me by. I had just been in school for 19 years. When I was in the Air Force, they said, you know, there were like 500 men in a hangar. And they said, okay, well, all those who've had 6 years and less of education get up and follow this surge. And a goodly number of people got us 7 years of education. By the 8 years of education, the place, you know, I mean, a lot of people had left. Now, 9 years, 10 years, 11 years. By 12 years of education, there were maybe 50 people out of 500. And they looked, you know, at 12 years, I mean, no, less, I'm sorry. There was maybe like 10 people out of 500 left. They said, of all those who've had more than 12 years, no, you know, I mean, at the college, so it was 13, 14, 15, 16. By the 16th year, I was the only one, there were 499 people had left. And so they said, didn't you go to school at all? And I said very smugly, I said, you said to stand up and follow the man when you call out your years of education. The guy said, okay. All those who've had 17 years of education, get up and follow this man. All those who've had 18 years of education, get up and follow this sergeant. And more sergeants kept coming in to look at this guy, this freak sitting by himself in this big airplane hangar where 500 people had been an hour before. And he said, well, all those who've had 19 years of education stand up and follow this. So I stood up and I said, which of you gentlemen do I follow? Well, they really hated me. They really, rightfully so. And, but at that moment, and they said, you spent 19 years in school? And it had not dawned on me until that very moment that I had spent 19 years in school. That's all I knew of life. I'd gone to school from the time I was 6 till 25. I'd been in school, and it didn't dawn on me that I said, oh, that maybe is overkill. This may be too much. So when I got out, I was haunted by that because I had nothing had happened to me. You know, I could write stories about, you know, I don't know what. But, so I went off, I said, I'm going to go to Europe I'm going to go to Europe in 1965. I said, I'm going to get some money together and I'm just going to go to Europe. I'm just going to finally see the world. So I went off to London and I had some friends from school who were living there, so I bunked in with them. And those were the days when it was very, very, very cheap. The dollar was so strong and the pound and, you know, everything was so cheap. You could live like a king, and the Beatles were there, and, you know, it was just a great time to be in London. And I mean, you could go to the theater for 50 cents. I saw Laurence Olivier do Othello for for 40 cents, you know. It was really astonishingly, it was great. And then I got a job working in a publishing house because they were looking for American readers to see if English books would sell in America. So I got a job in 2 publishing houses, and I was going blind reading. And I said, I came to get experience. I'm losing my eyesight reading 2 books a day and writing reports to make money to stay here. So I just said, the hell with it. So I went to Paris, where I'd never been, and I was very grand. I had my suitcase, and I just said, I'm never going back to London. And I took my suitcase, and I said, I'm going to get my experience. I'm going to find something to write about. And I took my suitcase and threw it in the Seine. Honestly, I said, I'm just starting with nothing, and I started hitching. And I got a ride, and I bought clothes along the way, and toothbrushes. It was just great. This is experience happening to me. And I got to Rome. Now, since I'd gone to Catholic schools, the nuns had always said, hey, if you know, to go to Rome is like one step closer to God, you know, I mean, that's where we all have to go. So I got there, and what knocked me out was I looked in the papers that day of getting to Rome, and all the papers were photographs of the Pope on Queens Boulevard, a place I'd been trying to flee from. The Pope, for the first time, had flown out of the Vatican to come to New York to plead for peace in the world, and to try to bring an end to the Vietnam War. And I said, hi, so he's not even here. I get to Rome, and the Pope's where I just tried to leave. I mean, is it like a pen pal, you know, Lend-Lease, we switching off? So anyway, I got there. Now, I kept on hitching, and since I was very pompous and all, and I just said I would write postcards to say, I don't know where I'll be, but I said, there must be, you can write me care of American Express, Cairo, Egypt. Because that was the kind of guy I wanted to be. I wanted to be somebody whose address would be Cairo, Egypt. And I got to Cairo, Egypt. And a couple, you know, about 2 months later, 6 weeks later. And waiting to see, would I write a play about Egypt? What was my play going to be about? You know, what was my subject going to be about? And I had neglected to tell you that when I left America, I couldn't wait to get out of it. I hated everything. I hated my family. I hated life. I just wanted, the future was mine. And so I got there, and I went to American Express, and indeed, there was a big, thick letter from my mother and father, who've been sort of wondering what the hell I was doing with my life. I mean, they liked saying I was in Yale, but once I was out, they just said, you know, I mean, the joke was, they said, we wish you would just get a job that you leave so we can say what you're out of work from. But what are you doing? You're doing nothing. So I was now going to Europe to hitchhike around. What's going on with this now 26-year-old son? And I got this thick letter from them, which is very odd because we always talked on the phone. I got very few letters from them. And what was in the letter, I took it out, it was all clippings of the Pope being in New York City. And my parents said, you know, you think you're going out to see the world. Well, you know what? The world came to see us. And we stood this close to the Pope, went right by us on Queens Boulevard, and we certainly waved to. Well, they wrote with such passion that I had never heard them write about what the Pope meant to them and what it was and how great it was. And looking at all these clippings, that I realized I had found my subject. I said, and I started writing The House of Blue Leaves that day in Cairo. And the play takes place on the day the Pope came to New York in 1965. I was so inspired and moved by how moved they were. And I came back and I started writing that play. And I came back in the fall, I came back then in the springtime and late winter. And the first act of the play was done at a new theater that was starting called the Eugene O'Neill Playwright Center up in Waterford, Connecticut. And the play was, the first act, that's all I'd written, was such a success that I got a fellowship at Yale. There was this other writer, Sam Shepard, and I each got a fellowship, a Rockefeller grant to go to Yale and work up there for a year. And so I was back at Yale now, living, not going to school, but working there. And, and my life started. But the fact of the matter is that if I had stayed in New York, that the day that the Pope came to New York, I would have said, what a stupid day, like it was last week when the Pope came to New York. You just draw this, you say, how do I stay out of traffic, avoid Midtown? What a stupid thing this is. But because it took me going halfway around the world to Cairo, that it opened up something in my parents who, in anger, wrote me about what I had missed, what I had forfeited. And I realized that yearning, the yearning that was in those letters, allowed me to connect to the best part of myself, a part that I had discounted because I didn't want to write about New York and Queens and myself and my family. I wanted to be the kind of guy who would, whose address would be Cairo, Egypt, American Express. And I found my subject, and it opened up and my life changed. But so the trip, anyway, it was extraordinary. Henry James says a serious writer, which I hoped I was, only has one or two, a writer, not a serious writer, a writer only has one or two serious ideas in his life. And I was very, very lucky that in my going out, that were in throwing everything away and hitching to find my subject, which is going to be noble and big and great, I went and I found home. Now it sounds an awful lot like the Wizard of Oz, but it takes us that way to say what it is, how we get in touch with who we are, how we find our voice. They say, how do you teach writing? Which I do. I teach playwriting now in the class where I'd gone almost 50 years ago. And and what you're trying to do is to try to tell somebody, you can't tell somebody exactly how to write, but the main thing you can do is to have them write their own voice, to find out how they are speaking, how they're not speaking in somebody else's voice. Because we're all very good mimics, so how we lead our own lives. I mean, very, very, and that's what this play was about. Blue Leaves is about people who are find it easier to live in other people's lives than to live their own life. Bananas, the wife in Blue Leaves, says, I know more about those famous people than I know about my husband, than I know about my son, than I know about me. My life is a stranger to me, but the celebrities in the world, the movie stars, the Pope, I know everything about them. I can look on television, I know everything about them, and I live in a house full of strangers. I don't know anything about them because I don't know how to say to my husband, who are you? I don't know how to say to my kids, who are you? What do you think? I don't know how to tell them who I am. And that got to be the subject of how living in other people's lives, where it's easier to live other people's lives. And I've been writing variations on that, I realize, not unconsciously, but how we live in other people's lives. That got to be a subject that gave me my footing, where I could speak out of it. I could find my voice, hopefully, in that. And that's, every time you write a play, you're just trying to find your own voice. You're trying to find your own footing in the material. And that goes whether you're a playwright or a novelist or a poet. It's where you find your voice, where you get your footing to say, this is who I am. This is who I am. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I mean, that's what this book by Charles Baxter is, now a major motion picture, is, can you hear me? Well, they did. He sold it to the movies, so somebody heard it. But I mean, that's what it... I'm not being snobbish. Oh, no, I've sold things to the movies, and I love it. God bless him. He can write 10 more books out of that. But, no, but it's about hearing me, how you are heard, how in this vast multitude, how one voice will get noticed. And so that's how what you try to teach is to teach the courage to, I just had a student who's been writing these pompous, pretentious plays. Oh, everybody speaks so fancy and elegant. And I just said, oh, God, you know. And then I said, show me stuff you wrote before you came to Yale, before Yale took over. And they always said, I don't want to show that. No, well, there were these stories about his family and kids getting beat up and knocking up this girl and this, you know, and fighting back and all, and this whole rich voice. I said, well, there's your voice. He said, I didn't come to Yale to go back to that. Well, I said, you didn't come to Yale to be this phony, to write this pretentious crap, you know. So, and that's, it's a very sweet class we have. But you know, when you're talking, it is life and death when you're talking about writing, when you're talking about out of yourself. You can't be polite as such, you know? And anything that you say in a class is not going to be half as bad as it have when you find it ripped from the headlines in the papers, when you have your, you know, reviews. And all our lives as writers is a collection of, oh yeah, you think you got bad reviews, let me tell you about my bad reviews. And so that's what I wanted to talk about today, is about this student who asked me yesterday, you know, about where do you get your ideas from. It's not where you get, we're surrounded by ideas. We live in narratives. We live in narratives all day long. People are always telling us who they are, how they got here, what we are, what we're seeing. I mean, our lives and the newspapers, the ads, everything is filled with narratives. We live in a sea of narratives. How we find our way out of that, to swim through, to say, here's a coherent narrative that I can share with you that will bring us together. And that comes out of where your footing is, where the ideas are that bring you alive. You know, and it's awful when, you know, when they talk about a writer having writer's block, that means you can't find your footing. It's not saying I can't write, it's I can't stand. I can't find my feet in this material. And that's the nightmare. And sometimes a writer will write something and he'll tell a story, and that's it. He can't tell that story again. There's not a theme that he or she can find themselves in again. So that's why every time you finish a play, you say, holy Christ, is this going to be the last time? Is this going to be it? And you just have to keep working and working and working and working. I'll tell you another story about newspapers. And you can work and work and work. You write every day. You write and write, looking for that story, you know, looking for that story. And I'll tell you two stories about writing. Okay, yes. Things that I learned along the, yes. I was at Yale, as I told you, when I was in that, you know, I got my fellowship at Yale in '66, '67. And now the Vietnam War was coming to fruition. You know, it was really going big time, in spite of the popes telling him to stop it. And it was so funny being in New York and the Pope coming and talking about bringing peace in Iraq, and 40 years ago the exact same speech was being given. I mean, you know, it's terrible. What have we learned? I mean, it's like nobody hears, nobody realizes that there was a past, that we've been here before. This is what surprised, this is another thing about the life of a writer, how you learn to find yourself, is, so I was at Yale, and it was starting anti-war, you know, a lot of anti-war protests, and I saw these guys graduating, undergraduates, you know, strapping young guys, just young guys who would be graduating and being drafted. The draft was, and going into this war to feed this war over in Asia, and where they still can't figure out why we were there. And I wrote this play about a young man going off and being sucked into this war. And it had a date that it was going to be done at the O'Neill up in Waterford, Connecticut, for this in 1967. The odd thing was that I couldn't find a way to begin it. Usually we talk about, oh, I can't find an ending. How am I going to end this damn thing? This was a play I couldn't figure out how to begin it. I sort of began, I don't know where it began, but I was in the middle of something, and I got to the end, but I couldn't figure out how to begin it. And and I knew that it had to have a very big statement, a big romantic statement of what this guy wanted life to be, to take him where, where he was going to end up. And I could no more figure out what that romantic statement, what that statement of yearning was. I didn't know what to do. I was just paralyzed by it. So I went out to my parents' apartment to change some clothes, pick up some stuff or something. And I found, going through my stuff, I needed looking for some books, and I found a box from my trip, my hitchhiking trip, a couple years, 2 years before now. And I went through it, looking to see, oh, look at this, I forgot this. Oh, yeah, I found a notebook, which I didn't remember. It's just a notebook. And I opened it up, and it was from that trip. It was from my hitchhiking trip. And I was sort of astonished, because I picked it up, and I remembered one day, it was in October 1965, that I was hitchhiking out of Rome to get across Italy, to get to Naples, to get to Brindisi across so I could go to Greece. And while I was hitchhiking, waiting on the outskirts of Rome on the main drag to get a ride, a terrible torrential downpour came. I mean, really torrential. And I ran inside the nearest building for shelter. Well, what it was an Etruscan museum devoted to Etruscans. They had all these pots of people dancing. And and it said that this was a race of people pre-Rome that vanished. They were there and they vanished. And I was so taken by this place, and the rain didn't stop, that I wrote this long riff about saying, well, you know what, if I could have been born anything in the world, I would have been born an Etruscan. Because they just danced right up out of the earth, and maybe they ended up, and nobody knows what happened to them, and they vanished, and maybe they danced right into these pots, and that's all that's left of them. It was a long riff about what I want. Well, what struck me as I was reading it was where it ended was exactly the place where my new play picked up. And I typed it up, and it just fit. And the play, it was a success. The play, but what astonished me was the role of chance in our lives. If I hadn't gone out to my parents, thanks to dirty laundry, if I hadn't gone out and seen my, and while I was waiting for the dryer to come to go look for, some stuff, to find this paperback notebook, that I wrote down. The shocking thing was that I learned that how much of what a writer's life is waiting for your unconscious to deliver. That without making it sound too much like Santa's workshop, that our unconscious has filled with these elves that are working overtime, taking information, sorting it, preparing it. Now why this speech that I would write in a book would end, I didn't know where it was going to go. I didn't know, but something remembered where that thing ended, and it just fit together like that. I realized that how much of a writer's life is waiting for your unconscious to deliver. You can't sit there and wait for it. You can't sit there and say, oh, it'll have to come. Two things had to happen. I had to write the thing originally in 1965, that riff. I just had to trust I had to trust the instinct to write it down, that where I was in this Etruscan museum, it moved me in some sensational way that I had no idea, no other reason other than I just wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote, and then it ended. And the sun came out, when I left and went to Greece. But the fact is I learned that a writer's life is both writing, plugging at it, because you don't know when the unconscious is going to deliver itself to you. is finally going to happen. I wrote and wrote and wrote plays. Some they liked, some they didn't, some they hated, some were, you know. But in about 1983, I was in London working on a movie. So working with a friend on working on something that did not happen, but it turned into something else. And friends from New York came. They called me. They said, Johnny, we have to see you tonight. Something happened to us 2 nights ago that we're still reeling from. We have to tell you. I said, okay, I'll meet you tonight. It's 7 o'clock at dinner. So we met 7 o'clock. And I said, what happened to you? They said, we have had the damnedest night 2 nights ago. This is that we were having dinner in New York, and this young black man showed up, who was Sidney Poitier's son. And he stayed in our house. Well, he took money. I mean, in the morning we woke up and he was taking money from us and had brought somebody into the house. It was a nightmare, and we can't figure out who he is. I mean, we don't know what happened. And I mean, they were really reeling. They were from this guy, this young black guy who said he was a friend of their children's. And they let him in because he was sick, and they took care of him. And then their children said, we never heard of him, when they called him in the morning, and they berated him. They didn't know what to do. When I got back to America about 3 months later, there was a story in the papers about a young man posing as Sidney Poitier's son rips off, a number of people. And I said, well, that's funny. That's funny. That was 1983. In 1989, 6 years later, I was waiting for my wife was out of town. My brother-in-law is going to be Labor Day weekend, and my brother-in-law was coming, and I had to stay home and wait for him to arrive because we were going to go out to the beach for this long Labor Day weekend. And I was writing a play, and I started writing. In the middle of the play, writing this thing, I suddenly started writing other things about Cézanne and paintings and art, and then these kids and Sidney Poitier. And I realized I was writing another play. That something else was literally almost, when I say dictated, it sounds too weird, but it was like that. Something was inside me getting out. And I said, does Sidney Poitier have any sons? And I live up the street from the Strand bookstore, wonderful old 8 miles of used books. And I ran up to the bookstore and I said, does Sidney Poitier have an autobiography? And they said, yeah, it's my story by Sidney Poitier. And I went up and I got it. I said, I had no sons, and he had all these inspirational things. And I put that in the play. I went up, the characters in the play went up to the Strand bookstore to find out about Sidney Poitier. Anyway, that play I wrote while my brother-in-law, luckily he was late, and I wrote 6 Degrees of Separation that day. But I realized, again, what surprised me was that it had been waiting there just 6 years, unbeknownst to me. I thought it was funny what my friends had been through. I read in the paper, the end. I mean, it didn't seem to be, I didn't say I got to write this, what a great story. And I wrote this thing in sort of a fever, and then it got to be Sunday, and I couldn't get into my computer. And I called this friend of mine who did some work for me, Mary Pat, and I said, Mary Pat, I'm in a nightmare. I think I wrote a play and I've lost it. I mean, it's like a fever. And so she came in from New Jersey on Monday and Labor Day. She got her vacation short. She came in to see if I could help me get into my computer to reclaim this play. And this is an old computer. This is 89. And she said, John, she said, there's a new technological advance. It's so brilliant, it's very hard to know. So write it down, but it's called a plug. And you stick it into the socket. And I plugged it in, and the play came up, and I printed it out and brought it to Lincoln Center, the producer at Lincoln Center that night. And Tuesday morning, he called up and said, we're doing it. So that was a play, that was called, if I had waited around, and that was, again, changed my life. That was a play where, but again, it taught me, as it had with the play called Musica, about waiting. You have to go out in search of you have to keep working and go out in search of your subject. Then you have to live for your unconscious, what the life of a writer is. I guess that's what the topic of this is. What is a writer's life, from my point of view, is waiting for your unconscious to tell you what's really going on inside you. And you can't sit back passively and say, well, I'm just sitting waiting. Gee, where's my unconscious? Hello? Hello, are you there? You know, you can't. You have to keep at it. You've got to keep writing and writing and writing and writing and producing things that you shape and form into something, waiting for those strokes that will happen to you. And so that's what those three things about finding your subject, trusting your unconscious, and learning to live with your unconscious. Because inside us there is this cauldron, as if we are trying to say, I don't know who I am. I have this public self that I'm talking here right now, which might as well be a sock puppet. It has no relation to what's going on inside me right now. There's a part of me right now that I don't know, that is 10,000 miles away thinking about something else. And so sometimes a writer lives a pretend life. You know, I'm a pretend lecturer here. Sometimes you're a pretend husband, a pretend teacher, because your real life is happening up here in the place that you can't get to, that you're waiting to shine a light on it. And that to me is the great challenging and scary, wonderful thing about being a writer, who I happen to work in the theater. It's because you're waiting for it to tell you what's going to happen. You can't control it. And it's, talk about gamble, you place a gamble on yourself that you will be able to produce it, that something will happen. And you know, I have friends who had early successes who have never been able to top them, have never been able to get back there again. I had a friend who wrote, anyway, what happens, you know, it's about learning to live with this thing inside ourselves. Well, I'll tell you what the story is. I was just starting to censor myself. Is that this guy wrote a play, a very well-known playwright, and he'd written a series of very interesting plays. And he wrote a play that was literally 500 pages long. And he gave it to a director, a very famous director. I will name no names in this. And he said, this director was interested in him. He said, and so the director said, well, this is fantastic, this play. But he said, what do you want it to be? He said, I don't know what it is. I can't cut it. I don't know how to shape it. I don't know how to shape it. And so the director said, you want to have me have a go around at it? And he said, yeah, if you can find a play. And so this director cut it down to 100 pages, cast it with a phenomenal cast. It was a really extraordinary cast. And it opened on Broadway and it was a big, big hit. It ran a year and a half, and a film was made of it. The nightmare of that was that the playwright looked at the play when he came to see what the director had cut out, and he said, that's not what I meant. That's not what I meant. Because in the play, which became out as, it was about in the play, the women were treated very, very badly by men and then fought back. And in the play, the cut play, the director had the women being guys treating the women terribly, and the women being passively accepting it and not fighting back. And the playwright said, but that's not what I meant. My play is about the women, how they deal with these men who are exploiting them. And he saw this play, and this play was a real success. It won prizes that year. And it was all about how chilling men are towards women, you know, and how, you know, and what women, it was very, you know. And this playwright, who had the biggest success of his life, was paralyzed for 10 years. He couldn't write because the play that he had meant he couldn't find, in that he trusted it to somebody else to find the play in it. The play that was found and accepted was a play he never would have written. And it took him, and in a sense, he's never quite recovered from it. from the success of that play. It's very, a play is a life and death thing. I mean, people kill themselves over plays, you know? I mean, I had a friend when I was a kid, the man across the street, Glenn, whom I loved, and one of the things I loved about him was he had a play on Broadway. Forget that it had closed in 9 performances. He had a play on Broadway. Well, what it took me a long time to realize was he had written this play that was produced by, directed by Oscar Hammerstein, the play before Oklahoma. And he thought it was going to be a big success, and it ran 9 performances. And he read the reviews and got in bed the rest of his life. He never got out of bed the rest of his life. He lived in the nightmare of that opening night for the rest of his life. And literally, he was paralyzed by the ferocity of the reviews. And anyway, it was very good for me because it taught me to say, no matter what happens, that's never going to happen to me. No matter what they say about me, and they have, it's not going to paralyze me. Those reviews, and that's what I try to teach my students, is that reviews happen in an alternate universe, not our universe. We write our work and produce our work, and then in this other world over here, this adjacent, the reviews come in, you know, and they can be good or bad, and that's why I got such horrible reviews one day in a play. I said, I'm never going to read reviews again. And I don't. I have my wife read them, like, you know, but I don't read them because if I see them, they get burned in my head. And I don't read the good reviews either. If I have a play like 6 Degrees, which got great reviews down the line, I didn't read any of those because I said, if I will not believe them when they're bad, I'm not allowed to believe them when they're good. And so those reviews just happen in another universe, because our life as a writer is to protect ourselves. That's why, you know, you have to. I teaching again, in what I teach my students is that how not to let your temporary job, your bread and butter job that you take to support your writing, how that doesn't take over your life and make your writing life secondary. And so that's about how we write for. It's like having this parasite, this ne'er-do-well who lives inside us that we have to support and live for. But it is very much, I guess, our true selves, a true self that all of us have within us. And that's, again, why we read. We read, watch, see, to find our true voice, to find ourselves, to say, yes, that's me. That person is speaking for me. Well, the writer is saying, I'm going to be vain enough and arrogant enough to say, I'm going to put my voice to say, I hope you agree with that. I hope you can find me in you. I hope that we can mesh. There's nothing like, you know, a play. I mean, last night, we had a lovely audience last night. And to see people laughing at something I had written, a number of years, strangers, you know, it was just moving that we had shared something, you know, that sense of communion right there in front of me. It was wonderful. Because thanks to Greg, you know, Greg had found the truth of the play and, and communicated that to his actors, which doesn't always happen. And so that's, I guess that's what it's about, you know, ripped from the headlines is how we remove ourselves from reality in order to find reality. And how, in removing ourselves from reality, we don't lose touch with the world. How we reflect the world. One of the students asked me yesterday, how do you reflect politics in your plays? You know, how do you reflect the world around you? And, you know, and I was saying that, in a sense, you can't write, it's very hard to write a play specifically about politics because they're changing all the time. It's good for cabaret, you know, where you've got, you know, short-term stuff, you know, where the material changes day to day. But the life around a play is, I'll tell you how, okay, here's another thing, how history can change a play. Sometimes events can happen in a play that will make a play out of fashion, out of date, and just make it say, oh, that's so, You know, I mean, you know, during the Vietnam War, people would say, and I'm sure they're having say, you know, saying, "Oh God, I hope my anti-Vietnam, I hope the war doesn't end before my anti-war play opens," you know, and wait, I was just being very clever, and I've so clevered myself back into oblivion. Oh, I know what I was going to say. Yes, about the play. In 1981, my play, House of Blue Leaves, one of the things in it, I assume you don't know the play. I mean, I'm talking like, you know, you should know. But it's about a young man whose parents have given him such horrifying values that he will do anything to be noticed, and he realizes he is nothing, and he's going to blow up the Pope and kill the Pope and get on the cover of, you know, just be famous. This was in 1965, then sort of an original concept. And so in 1980, and people, when the play opened, they said, "Oh, so kooky, imagine wanting to blow up the Pope. It's so witty. Where do you get these ideas from?" Anyway, in 1981, I was in Times Square, and I happened to look up at the zipper going around what used to be the Times building, where the news goes around. It says, "Pope shot. Bulgarian attempts to assassinate Pope." And my first thought was, what will this do to my play? And Blue Leaves at that point happened to be being done up at the Berkshire Theatre Festival up in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, in the Berkshire Mountains. It was a nice summer theater. And I very rarely go to see productions of my plays. I came here not to see Blue Leaves, but to see Montana. And so I went up to see what this dose of reality would do to my play, which made fun, you know, which mocked somebody wanting to blow up the Pope, kill the Pope, to get attention, when that reality finally had happened. Well, what was remarkable that night in seeing that play in the Berkshires, in this little summer stock barn of a theater, was that news which had come out the day before, the response to the play was entirely different. It was as if that before, which had been, you know, kooky, people would say kooky, and where do you get these ideas? It was as if a glass wall between the audience and the play had shattered, and boom, the stage came up and the audience came up, and we all slid into the same trough. And the laughter was outrageous. That the laughter was that the worst had happened. They knew where that was, and it liberated it opened up the play, and then it played it, you know, at Lincoln Center a couple of years later, and was ran for a couple of years, you know, at Lincoln Center and on Broadway, with John Mahoney and Stockard Channing and Susie Kurtz, in a wonderful production. And it's interesting. We're doing the play again at the Mark Taper in California. It's wonderful to have a play. The play right now is playing here, tonight's playing in Missoula, and it's playing in Portland, Oregon, that I know of, and then we'll be doing it in Los Angeles in September. You know, to see how the time keeps matching, stays up with the play stays up with the times, and that doesn't rarely happen, and that's what makes me you know, most excited about that. But it's all a chance. I mean, history could just as easily pull the plug in the play to say, "Oh, that belongs to 1960, the end of it," you know. There seems to be something in it that's still speaking to today. I don't know. I mean, I don't know whether 6 Degrees, which is not had, it's done a lot, but it's not had a major New York revival. I don't know whether a play that takes place in 1989, 1990 in New York, when there were things like apartheid in South Africa still were. I don't know if time has passed, if Blue Leaves will just be an artifact from that time, or whether it still will have reverberations today. It played at the Guthrie 2 years ago and connected to the audience. There was something in that about the fact of living other people's lives, saying I need to be somebody other who I am in order to survive in life. Again, without that fame around me, I am nothing. Without having that, it's so I don't know what it is. Anyway, that's my 2 cents, or it sounds like 3 cents. I've gone on long enough, but. So that's just trying to get, you know, just a look into at least this writer's life. I can't speak for any other writer, but this is it's having that having that trust in the, having that trust in the future, having that trust, and keeping at it, hammering away every day at it. So now I'd like to hear from you. Okay. Yes, sir.
I have a question about gardenia,
Yeah.
Liddy Breeze,
Lighty Breeze, yes.
and Women in Water.
Yeah.
I'm curious, three of your history plays.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could identify for us the authors who inspired you to think about the distant past.
Well, I'll tell you, these are plays I wrote. These are plays that I wrote about 19th century Nantucket. I was living on Nantucket, and I had a play in 1979 called Bosoms in Neglect that was about a man going to a psychiatrist, and he meets a woman in the waiting room, has a love affair between a woman, he shares a waiting room with their psychoanalyst with this girl, and they fall in love, or don't. Anyway, when that play opened, I loved that play, but I said, you know what I'm sick of? A lot of people draw out of this well of writing about the things that my targets, my points of interest are things that other people, other writers are interested in, whether it's a Woody Allen movie or some, making fun of psycho, or dealing with that, people going, exploring their psyches. And in a sense, I got tremendously bored with myself because I realized that what I was interested in at that time was what a lot of other writers were interested in. And I was writing plays about New York. After House of Blue Leaves, I wrote Musica, which was about young man in New York going off to Vietnam. I wrote a play about Rich and Famous, about a young playwright who becomes successful and hoping for success, and what happens. I wrote this play, Landscape of the Body, which was about a series of murders down in Greenwich Village where I was near me, and I was trying to solve that murder. And then I wrote this play, Bosoms in Neglect. And so I was writing plays about my contemporary time in New York City. And I said, I wish I had something that belonged only to me. I just wished I had a world that belonged only to me. And one of the things I liked about Nantucket is that it is a very self-contained universe, an island 30 miles off the shore of New England. That's the only part of America that is not connected, aside from Hawaii, connected by the continental shelf underneath. The Ice Age. Nantucket stands by itself, geologically. It's just this rock out at the sea. And it had a very, very rich history. And I said, I wonder what it was, imagining myself back to then. My parents had been born in 1895. And I said, I wonder what they knew. I'll set a play in 1895, only because that's when they had been born. And I started writing a play inspired by Nathaniel Hawthorne, by a novel, one of my favorite novels at that time, The Blithedale Romance. I haven't thought of this in years. I thank you for bringing it up. I loved The Blithedale Romance. There was a woman in it named Zenobia, who, is this your period?
I know Hawthorne.
Are you a Hawthorne?
I'm very fond of his work.
Me too, yes. It's amazing. Hawthorne is somebody he wrote his last novel called The Marble Faun, written in the 1860s. You can still use as a guidebook to get around Rome. Where he's writing about, in Rome, 2008, you can take this novel from mid-1860s, and find your way around Rome using it, not just where it is. I was very, very moved by that novel, and the fact of a woman dominate, who brought all these men together. And I said, I want to write my Blithedale Romance, which is all about at a time in America where there were communities of idealists formed in the East, New Harmony, Indiana, and Brook Farm in Massachusetts. And it all comes out of the American. Again, I've always been interested that Etruscan speech about I've been interested in how people transcend themselves, trying I mean, I love plays. To me, what the theater does better than anything, more than it is, where it's attempting to get to those moments of transcendence, where you see the human spirit trying to escape from the coils of everyday, that the tension between everyday life and where we want to be. And that seemed to be, I wanted to write so I wrote a story about a group, about a community that had failed, a community of idealists that had failed, and the woman, the Zenobia, the Lydie Breeze, had even killed herself in failure, not being able to bear what her failures were. In explaining the play to the director and various actors when we did the play, in doing telling the backstory where it had happened 10 years before that and 10 years before that, I wrote another play. I wrote the play backwards. The play was originally called Gardenia. I've since, about 2000, 1999 or something, I rewrote the play and called it Bullfinch's Mythology, because I needed the people, when the community formed, I needed something grander. I didn't have a grand scheme at the heart of it, at the heart of the idea of the utopian community. And I found it years later and rewrote the play and retitled it, called Bullfinch's Mythology, and about people wanting to be one with the ancient gods. And then in explaining how all these people met each other, I went back and wrote yet a third play called Women in Water, which has still never been, I've never allowed it to be done in New York. We will, I'm waiting, that's next down the line in a couple of years. But it was a play that was written backwards in explaining how people meet each other and what the currents are of these mutual needs of transcendence are that bring people together, and how that can blind them, how that need for transcendence and idealization can blind me to the realities of you and you and you and you, and where transcendence, the Ralph Waldo Emerson, whom I adored reading, made me cry when I was a kid. And I mean that. But what was possible for the human spirit, that's where those plays came from. They were not well received the first time they came out, because they were unlike anything else I'd ever done before. And in New York, you're always reviewed on your last play, the kind of plays that you do. And I had always written these contemporary, funny, comedies. And now I was writing a whole different kind of play, because I needed to find a new voice. I needed to paint myself into a corner in order to find. That's another thing I learned about in my life as a writer, that you just can't say, okay, well, this is what I do know. I write life about contemporary, okay, I write this. To me, the most important moment of the 20th century art is in the early 1900s, like 1906 or so, where Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque, two men who could paint better than anybody in the world. They were great colorists, draftsmen, everything. They said, we can do it all. Let us, I'm simplifying what they said, the way they did it, but they said, let us remove from ourselves everything that we know. Let's not use color, let's not use draftsmanship, let's remove ourselves from everything and see if we strip everything away from us to see what remains, what comes up. And Cubism was born, which was the great modernistic, the great movement of the 20th century, which is still not sufficiently understood. It's where time gets involved in paintings, where for the first time since the Renaissance, the canvas was no longer a window looking into a world that we could see, oh, look at those flowers, look at those people in the distance, look at where perspective is. They say, let's take all that away. And the work of art became the canvas itself. They said, let us deal only with the surface of the canvas. So therefore they could take this, although it was a pack of cigarettes, and paint the strings of a guitar, but then take the actual cigarette pack itself and paste it onto the canvas and say, why should I paint it when the machine can do it just as well? And the movements that came out of that celebration of just what was real. I found, I'm not putting myself in the, believe me, although I'd like to put myself in it, but that lesson of Picasso and Braque saying, remove everything you can do well with some efficiency, some proficiency. Remove that from yourself and see what remains and see what how you might drown. But see, paint yourself into a corner. And that has been, since that time in 1980 when I started writing those plays on Nantucket. I'll tell you what inspired the plays too, that there was a woman in Nantucket who had been a great Polish actress named Elżbieta Szyzewska. And in the mid-60s, she was in Poland, and David Halberstam, the journalist, came to Warsaw to do a story on Poland at this point in the with the living life in the Iron Curtain. And Elżbieta was the biggest star in Poland. She was playing in After the Fall, the Arthur Miller play about Marilyn Monroe, playing the Marilyn Monroe part. And David Halberstam was this big, heavy, handsome, wonderful, saw Elżbieta in the play and fell in love with her, and she fell in love with him. He couldn't speak Polish, she couldn't speak English, and they ran away together. And she came to America and defected. She escaped from Poland and left. And in punishment for that, her name was stripped from Poland. Movies were not allowed to be shown. But because she couldn't speak English, she couldn't get any work in America. She was a star. And after a couple of years, the marriage, married people, it's hard enough being married when you speak the same language. The transcendence had worn off, and David left her, and she was abandoned on Nantucket. She was abandoned on Nantucket, alone on Nantucket. And I was, one winter day, I knew she was very excited because there was some sort of, I don't know, Voice of America, there was some Lend-Lease thing where a choir from Poland was coming to do a tour of America. And Elżbieta's 12-year-old niece that she had never met, Magda, was coming to Boston to sing. And she got permission to come for a day, to come over to Nantucket to meet her aunt, whom she had never met, only heard of. And I was walking on the far end of the island, and I suddenly saw Elżbieta, who was very dramatic, with long flowing robe, walking with this 12-year-old child, and Elżbieta was going, and I was saying, what is she teaching this child? And I was seeing that image that made me start the play. What is it that we teach each other? I still don't know what she taught that child. Magda went back to Poland. She didn't defect. Elżbieta still lives in New York. And but what knowledge we pass on. I was given that day by seeing that image of that woman out at a beach in the far end of Nantucket, in silence, saying, "How do we pass on?" And that's where. That was the moment when I went back that day and started writing the play. It was that moment that got me back into the world of Hawthorne and Emerson. Does that vaguely answer your question?
But there was no author who inspired you with that interest in history?
I told you.
Well, no particular other dramatist?
Nobody else, no other playwright. No playwright was writing that play. No playwright had gone there, and that's another thing that made me love it. That it was not like any other play. That I was into complete virgin territory. I was not writing out of New York, 1979, 1980, 1990, and again writing that, spending a number of years in Nantucket, 19th century Nantucket, and immersing myself in all that, allowed me then to come out and write 6 Degrees. Which again earned my way back into my modern New York City. But I learned that you have to paint yourself into a corner where all your tricks are of no use, to find a new set of tools. That seems to me to be the challenge of what kind of corner we paint ourselves into, so we don't repeat ourselves.
I have a question.
Yes.
What are your reflections about the concept of tragedy in contemporary
the concept of tragedy in contemporary theater. I think that even though these are tragic times, I don't think that we can deal with tragedy in anything less than with one of the eyes being comedy. I think that we have to come into tragedy I think when I say comedy, I'm saying, you know what I read coming out here? It's something I had not read since I was, I don't know if I have, I can't remember, I mean, what I read bore no resemblance. But I was looking for, it's a long plane ride, and I said, I want a long book to read on the plane, in case we get stranded at the airport, and when it lasts me both go out. And I took Moby Dick off the airport, off the shelf. Well, I've read half of Moby Dick now coming out here. What surprised me, what I hadn't been prepared for, was this great, tragic American epic. How funny it is. It's an adventure story. It's an Ishmael. They see things funny. Even Ahab is not this doer. I mean, he's mad, but there's a wit to him. You see why he's the captain. You understand it's an adventure story that Melville has written. That is the glee that is written, the zest of the story. I think that when we think of, it used to be like in the 40s and 30s and 40s and 50s, a tragic play, a serious play meant that it had no laughs in it, that it had no laughter in it. I don't think we can get to the tragic unless we capture some of the exhilaration of being alive in order to see what that collapse is. So I think that's why people are having so much trouble today writing about today, because we don't know, it seems to be so grim that it's easy to be grotesquely, absurdly funny about it, cartoonly funny about it, but I don't think that we have sensed the exhilaration of, I think it's going to take another generation, or maybe, who knows, somebody might be writing a play right now in New Mexico that'll change all our eyes, the way that Angels in America suddenly made the zest of writing about AIDS. AIDS no longer, until Tony Kushner wrote Angels in America, AIDS was this grim, sad, tragic thing about young people, having life, dying too young, which is true. But that's what it was. You just say, oh God, not another one dying. I'm so sad. And it gets to be about the people mourning, the self-pity of the people left behind. Tony Kushner found a way to tell this, to dramatize this story with that zest, with that exhilaration, where people could end up in Antarctica, and you say, what are you doing in my hallucination? And angels could come down. And it showed us a way into that world. But I think that's the only way to get into the tragic. And I believe that the tragic is linked to the transcendent that I was talking about. So, I just saw a Philip Glass opera the other night in New York at the Met about Mahatma Gandhi, and it was so thrilling. It's a tragic story of India, and somehow it just became sublime. Why, I can't tell you. It was so hypnotically 4 hours long, and you were just, the audience, 4,000 people just rapt, and it was so what the human spirit is capable of doing, and what it can't do, and what it can do, and about how the transcendence can hopefully win without any sentimentality or self-pity in the eyes of the viewer. Anyway, does that answer? That's okay. You had a question, sir?
Yeah. Well, first I'll just say this. My wife is Polish and I'm American, but she speaks wonderful English, so we have a chance. Based on her story. I was kind of curious as a writer, is there anything that you inherently distrust when you are writing? Like, are there any themes, and maybe this is different for different writers, but when you're writing and all of a sudden a certain theme or a certain kind of thing comes out and you just kind of learn to distrust this certain type of thing, and why has that come up? Why is that something you learn to distrust?
if something is funny and I don't know why it's funny, and I'm being clever, if I'm showing off, if I'm being really smart ass, which you may not, I have a tendency to be. If I get that, I know I'm going to be in trouble. I know it's going to be a very short-term duration. It's not going to give me anything. Sometimes you have to write through it. You've got to be clever. You've got to get right through a lot of clever shit to get to where it is you want to be. And you really have to see through it. If I knew the answer to that, if I could give you the answer to say, yes, when I hit theme B, I know I'm in trouble. You can spend 6 months on a play and say, this is the best thing I've ever done, and you realize, you say, fuck, this is a piece of shit. I got to the wrong place. It keeps changing. That's what's so maniacal about it, was that you can't, you don't know when, you don't know right, sometimes you know right off the bat, you say, oh yeah, I'm right at home. But when you're working and you're trying to keep something moving along, and we will bring, you'll say, you know what, this is very Shavian. This is like George Bernard show. This is so witty. If I get there, I know I'm in trouble. I've learned that from the past. So I better get out of that mode quickly. But I don't know. If I knew what the themes were that I shouldn't, because I might be saying, I might fool myself by saying, you've never written like this before. This is something brand new. And you just say, there's a reason why you haven't written like that before, you know. And it takes you time. It takes you time to get it. But there's no clear way to know we're on the right path right off the bat. What you're just trying to get through is just get through today of writing. You're just trying to have enough pages today to look at a week from now. There's this one writer named Somerset Maugham, who was a very second-level writer, but he wrote a book called, I forget what it's called. But in it he says it's very important for a writer to know when to reread his or her work and when to throw it away, you know, because we can write something and then we'll be in a foul mood, you know, something like, you just say, oh, this is shit, throw it away, and you were wrong. But it's when to know a place where you've got to be lost in your work and write that and get it all out, and then put on a completely new hat to read it and say, you become another person to say, now I've got to go through this and say, what can I salvage? And sometimes you can write 10 pages, and if you end up with one sentence of value, that's a good day. That's a good 10 pages. But you've got to have the proper eyes to recognize what, it's just trusting that. But I wish I knew what the themes were that I should avoid, because you think you can do anything, you know. So, but it tells it to yourself. It reveals itself to you pretty soon when you finish it, and it's not, it's not working, and you've got to get back to the drawing board. But you only can learn it. You can't learn it before the fact. You have to go through it before you can learn it. Okay? Yes, dear.
I just wanted to say, you questioned earlier whether history separation had its time. Unfortunately, I've never actually seen the play, but I'm thrilled with the film, and I feel like no matter what time you're in, the idea of wanting to be someone else or how far so far with that, I feel like.
Well, I hope so. I hope from your mouth that's what I hope.
Lisa Kittredge is my favorite character in anything ever, and I thank you for creating her.
Wow, thank you. The movie was we had a very happy time making the movie. It was, yes, it was a very happy experience. As opposed to the movies which in general are nightmares. Yes, it's, and the only happy time I was working on a movie about 7 years ago, I guess 8 years ago now. And I just said, if my finger, I was a director I hated, a project I hated, and I said, and I was doing it to make some money, to pay the rent. And I said, if this finger hits the A on this key, I am doomed to hell for the rest of my life. And I got up and I said to the director, I'm sorry, I have to I have to go back home, I have to leave. And I went and I quit the project, and I called the Writers Guild and withdrew as a member, and so I wouldn't be allowed, I just dropped out of the union, so I wouldn't be allowed to write, so I wouldn't be tempted anymore. And I felt as happy as I've ever felt in my life getting out of that world. I've written 3 movies, each one has been a wonderful experience, but I've written about 6 or 7 movies that were awful experiences for various reasons. Anyway, thank you for that, dear, thank you. Okay, one more question. Wait, did Dr. Borgman ever show up? Well, who the hell? Well, I'm supposed to introduce did I introduce myself? My name is John Guare, and I'm just come from Missoula.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Montana,
Montana.
I would like to welcome you here and introduce the one, the only, the inimitable, Mr. John Guare. Sit around for a while.
Well, now I'll begin my entire speech. I have a whole other speech I'll begin. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
He's a very conscientious man.
Huh?
Borgman is a very
He used to
conscientious
be. He used to be. Oh, well.